welcome. My name's Cann with Harbour Insight, and with me I have Hayden, Locke, Chief Executive of Marimaca. Marimaca is focused on its namesake project in Chile, and today we're going to talk to Hayden, hopefully, about the geology and get into some of the technical detail there. Hayden, welcome.
Thanks, Chris.
When people think of Chile, they naturally think of copper, obviously, and they think of the big porphyries and the porphyry superhighways there. Marimaca is slightly different. My understanding is it's an IOCG interpretation. Can you give us a bit of an understanding around the technical detail, how they differ?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of differences, but the primary difference is just the quantity of sulphide material, sulphide mineralisation, iron sulphide, but also in an IOCG, iron oxides. And so the dominant iron that we see in our project is magnetite, but in many ways they are quite similar, and there is still, I think, debate amongst the purest geologists as to whether IOCG is a true deposit type that is really distinct from those large-scale base metals deposits that we often hear spoken about much more commonly.
So one of the things they have in common, my understanding, when you look at something like Olympic Dam, for example, and you look at the major porphyries of Chile, is scale. Is that the case with what you're looking at Marimaca? Obviously, you've started with a smallish scale project, and you've got a bit of a hub and spoke. But do you see it as a geology of scale for your particular focus?
Yeah, there is definitely the potential for sulphide mineralisation at depth of a significant scale. And I think the IOCG belt runs all the way up the coast of Chile and into the southern part of Peru. And there are numerous examples of projects that have started as oxide caps and then gone into large-scale sulphide projects. The most notable recent one is the Monteverde project done by Capstone Copper, which is an IOCG, coastal IOCG in the low coastal range, had been operating, producing 60,000 tonnes of copper cathode for sort of 10 plus years, owned by Anglo American. When it was acquired by the team behind Mantos Copper, they drilled and made an enormous sulphide discovery, which is now underpinning the Monteverde expansion. So we see a lot of potential for that at depth. It's never properly been tested. We've had some indications. We've been balance sheet constrained, and it's a relatively expensive drill program. But our intention is, during the course of this year, to go back and drill that target. And that's really to provide catalysts and value creation for our shareholders as we march the main project forward through the boring La Sonde trough.
It feels like quite a severe oversight to have these major global scale projects sitting underneath an oxide project, to not drill that. Is that a regular occurrence? I would have thought that most of the time people are starting with the oxide, knowing that there will be a broader sulphide play at some point once cash flows are underway.
Absolutely, but there's no guarantees in exploration. There's always the potential for a large-scale economic bulk tonnage sulphide mining operation, but equally there's a good chance that it could be very narrow, high-grade feeder zones that are much more challenging to be economic. And so you won't know until you actually drill it. I'm sure there are a lot of reasons why these targets weren't drilled. Obviously, the copper price is one. A lot of these projects are lower grade, and so when the copper price was significantly lower, it might not have made as much sense. But as the copper price rises, those lower grades become economic, and as technology changes, they become economic. And so there's a whole host of reasons why they haven't been drilled and then would be drilled. In our case, we were just balance sheet constrained. We would have loved to have drilled it, but it's an expensive drill campaign for a company that has not historically had a huge amount of free cash on the balance sheet to go and chase these large-scale targets with. We think there's a fairly good probability of success, but equally, no success could be damaging to the potential for our shareholders.
Talk about a significant or material size of drilling campaign. What does that look like at the moment in terms of metres planned?
So what we're planning for at the moment is a starting campaign of 10,000 metres of deep diamond. Now, the challenge there is these are 1,000+ metre drill holes, each of them costing, because of the topography, somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000 a hole. Doesn't sound like much, but as I said, we've been focusing a lot on upgrading the Marimaca oxide deposit to M&I to get it to a DFS level, and so $5 million was a reasonable amount of money for us. Now that we're a slightly bigger company and we're at an inflection point, the dilution on that is probably more manageable for us as a management team. So we will be definitely looking to drill that during the course of this year.
Okay, and how does that fit into the strategy? So when you've got some regional consolidation, Madrugador and Pampa Medina now in there, you've got better visibility over what the regional geology looks like. With that current program and those projects now as part of that bigger picture, what's the strategy in terms of the oxide, and then still testing out what that bigger picture sulphide story looks like?
So the development strategy for the oxides wouldn't change if we made a significant scale sulphide discovery. Certainly not for us as a junior company. It might change things for a large scale company who need significantly more scale to make it worth their while. But for us, the oxide is a great project, and that's our first priority, is developing that and becoming a copper producer. So really, the reason for drilling now is to fill in the Lassonde trough, that boring but necessary phase that we're going through in development, where there's no excitement for investors and there's no value creation, in terms of high impact exploration. We're very fortunate in that we have a large land package that's highly prospective, which is quite unusual. Like, a lot of these companies going through the development milestones have sort of tapped out the potential of their deposits. We don't have that issue, so we'll be doing, I'd say, quite a bit of exploration, looking for both complementary resources for the Marimaca oxide project, but then the big prize, which is always the large scale sulphide discovery.
Okay, and what kind of timelines are you looking at in terms of that initial program that you're working on at the moment? Is it more of the same for follow-up programs, or are you looking to essentially do step outs?
So we're drilling at the moment. We have done a significant step out campaign, which has really been about identifying the limits up at the Sierra de Medina project, the limits of the Manto horizon. And that's been really interesting and indicates that it's a very large system. There's obviously variability of grade, but we've seen consistent mineralization across that whole area, which has certainly got us very excited. I'd say we will continue to do step out drilling there to try and identify the limits of that system, but then we're going to come back in and add in some delineation drilling, which may get us to an expanded inferred resource, certainly on Pampa Medina. We'll come back and do some drilling on Madrugador to move that into an inferred resource, which will then start moving forward on the integration PEA to try and underpin that growth story that we're starting to talk about.
Okay, in a separate conversation, we've talked about the internal resources that you've brought in to handle the various different activities that you've got going on. How do you find juggling that from a management perspective in terms of delivering that core DFS and that base project in Marimaca, but also generating the excitement by having a genuinely systematic exploration project that delivers results?
Well, the exploration team is now very much separate from the project, and that is not uncommon as you go through this development cycle. Avowed exploration geologists have a very different way of thinking about geology, and for them it can be quite boring to go into project geology. And so Sergio, who is our VP exploration, is very much an explorationist. So we've separated the project geology from exploration, and Sergio and Paola and the team are focused on exploration. Of course, they're still feeding into the project geologists because they have such a depth of knowledge of the project, having lived and breathed it for the past decade. So there's a constant engagement, but we've separated those two completely, so they're running independently of each other and making progress independently of each other.
Okay, and at the risk of having expectations, when you look at the programs that you've got planned for this year and potentially leading into early next year, what are you hoping for from the exploration? What's the kind of picture that you're hoping will start to form?
Well, we'd very much like to underpin our growth story of 50,000 tonnes of nominal capacity from the DFS for a reserve life of 12 to 13 years, a mine life when we include the inferred of 15 to 16 years, upping that to 70 to 75,000 tonnes for that 15-year mine life. That would be a great first outcome, and I think based on what we're seeing from the first round of drilling at Sierra de Medina, Pampa Medina in particular, we can certainly see the potential for that pretty comfortably as it currently stands. Obviously, we've got to make sure that the infill drilling confirms the continuity of that mineralised horizon, but there's certainly the potential to do that. And then in the longer term, we would, I'd be very much hoping that we can make a Cachorro-style discovery, something that is significantly larger scale than anything that we have in our portfolio today. Obviously, that's a higher degree of risk, but it's something that we believe the exploration model that Sergio has presented to us as a management team, and we really want to test the theory.
Hayden, that's all we've got time for. Thanks for speaking with us.
Thanks, Chris.